This right here is Wix Studio. It's the brand new platform from Wix, and it's a no-coding platform that is replacing things like Editor X. It's pretty cool, and in this video, I'll be doing a crash course so you can learn exactly how it works, even if you're a brand new beginner and wanting to learn how to build websites. Let's begin. I'll start off here on Google. I'll search up Wix Studio. This is a web creation platform built for agencies, and it's also no-code. I'm going to select this link and I'm going to log in at the top right. I'm going to log in with Google, but you can create your own account. And once you do, you enter the dashboard. Over here, I'm going to create a brand new site using Wix Studio from a blank canvas. This will get us started and I can show you the dashboard for the editor. We'll start at the header. At the very top left, we have our pages. Right now, we just have the home page. In the middle, we have our responsive viewports. We can view the tablet or the mobile phone or back to the desktop. There's also custom breakpoints if you want to create your own, but I'll leave this as default for the time being. You can also zoom in and out. This doesn't change the breakpoint, but allows you to see more of the screen. At any point, you can also upgrade to a premium plan, getting you a free domain, or you can use the free plan, which still lets you edit and create sites. Here is the user settings, which I'll leave for later. And on the right here, we have preview, which allows us to preview the page we haven't yet created, as well as the publish button, which allows us to publish all our changes to the web. We can pass in an address that we wish to use. And if we have the free version, we can just use the / address over here. I'll call it Wix Studio template. And here we can select the link and actually view the page properly like anyone else would. All right, let me close this off and head back to the editor itself. Now I want to show a little bit of the left-hand menu. There's a lot of items here that allow us to do things. We'll start off at the top left, which is quick add. This allows us to place different things on the page, like elements, like an image. Here you can select the image, move it around, and if you hit delete, it disappears. You can also drag these elements into place by simply selecting, holding them, and dragging them into the spot you wish. From here, you can add a number of different elements, from images to text, to buttons, to containers, to videos, pretty much all the basics that you would ever need for building a web page. The next item here is assets. We'll get into that later on. Next, we have sections. These are pretty much template sections ready for you to use and customize to your own need. Let me show you an example. Here's an About Us section. I can simply select it and it pastes straight into the page. Here I can edit it and customize it. I could reduce the text or change it and even resize it. And I'll show more customization options later in this video. There are quite a few different options under the sections. There are sections for services or products or teams, and each one are quite easy to add. Simply select the one you want, and then each time you can just customize it like this. You don't always have to use the pre-made sections. And there are lots of different types of sections to choose from. There's also interactive sections if you want something more interesting, and also sections for navigation, things like headers and footers which you can place into the page. I'm going to select this footer over here and select to add it to the page, and here it is, except it's at the very top of the website. I'm going to select the new option here for layers. In here, I've got all the layers and sections for the page. I can customize these however I want. So I could select these 3 buttons over here and rename this section now to footer so that I know what it is. Then I can drag it to the bottom, basically making sure that it exists at the bottom of the page, which is a quick and simple way to move it about. You can still do this normally within the editor itself, so you can double click on sections or move them. But when you start building larger pages with lots and lots of different sections and layers with lots of nesting, it's always good to label and use them correctly. I'm going to change some of the layers I currently have, removing this one over here, which I'm no longer using. Now I'll just have the section for the header, the teams, and the footer. The next item on the left-hand menu is the pages, and as you might have figured out, this is just to create a new web pages that you can browse between. I'm going to add a new blank one right here called About Us, and as you can see, it starts off a complete blank template, but it still has the header and the footer. If I wanted the header to also update the menu, I can select the menu up here to add it manually. I could also select all the items, so whenever new pages are created, they automatically get added to the top menu section. Since the menu component exists on both pages, it should exist with the new updates across both pages too. This is great, and this leads us to our next section here, which is called the global sections. Global sections are basically components or sections that work across different sites but exist in one state. This means you can edit them. For example, here in the header, I can add a heading 3, and you'll be able to see that when I switch between the home page and the About Us page, the heading section stays the same. I'll get more into creating and editing and using global sections later in this video. But for now, the next section we're going to check on the left menu is the global styles. These site styles are things like typography, color, and page transitions, which we can edit. Things like heading 1, 2, 3, as well as the font, size, and scale that they are, and you can even customize these to your heart's content. These are styles that will be reflected across all the pages of the site, and so it's useful to set these up at the start. Colors are another section you can change, so you could change the background, the active color, as well as other accent colors. The next item on the left menu is the app market. Now this is pretty cool. There's a lot of things here that you can install. The basic app manager allows you to add things like stores, bookings, blogs to your website. The app market is something brand new to Wix Studio. These are apps that have been custom designed by other people to add new features and functionality to your website, such as a contact form. You can easily add this to a website by selecting Add, agreeing to allow it to communicate with Wix Studio, and all of these just work, similar to how you might find on the iPhone as an app store or even on a Google or Android app store. They're also updated by the developer and have additional functionality that could be built out in the future as well. And if you're really interested, you could even build your own apps and sell them on the marketplace, which is another new feature to Wix Studio. Feel free to browse all the apps already. There are all types, from marketing to online sales to communication and design, and if you want to manage them, just go to Manage Apps at the bottom where you can customize them. There's also custom apps, ones that you can build yourself. I've been playing around with this and I'll get into this a little bit later, but it's another feature that comes new with Wix Studio. Moving on the left-hand menu, we also have the CMS, or the Content Management System. This is where you can create dynamic bits of content, including pages, forums, and other things. And this is the kind of stuff that is useful if you're managing large data sets and need to be able to have them update the website automatically without manually having to change everything. Let me show you a quick example. I'm going to use a pre-made preset here of this team board, and it's going to create the dynamic pages based on the data set itself. Here, this CMS entry has basically some dummy data, like full name 01, 02, 03, and we've got some example pictures to go along. This is the dynamic page, and this would be populated based on that data set. This is different from the static pages, but it also means that it's connected to your CMS. So if you wanted to change that, you just head to CMS, your collections, and then just update the information in here, which is in a nice table view. If you want to learn more, just have a look at some of the helpful videos. Next is the coding section of Wix Studio. Here you can actually start coding on your page, integrating JavaScript and Node.js and other features based on whatever your needs are. All of this basic stuff runs on top of Velo, a special kind of coding interface very similar to JavaScript on top of the Wix Studio framework. You can also have a look at the global code as well as the CSS inside of your page and customize them directly if you want to add custom styling in. There are also options for backend code. You can connect up Wix IDE directly to VS Code, which is pretty cool. You can also access your database and collections and even external databases too. And under packages and apps, you're able to install NPM packages, Velo packages, or even create new apps using Wix blocks. And you can connect your site up to GitHub. Moving on the left-hand menu, we also have comments where you and other people can leave feedback or information or even tasks to do based on the page you're working on. Personally, I like to use this as a little bit of a to-do list of tasks I still need to do on the page, and once I've done them, I can tick to resolve them. And finally, the last two items are the video tutorials if you want to learn more about Wix Studio and how to use it, as well as the easy help access here where you can learn more about how to utilize or customize Wix Studio as well. Now I'm going to showcase the right hand inspector menu. This is a special menu that dynamically changes depending on the content you have. Right now, I haven't selected anything, so I'm just on the page inspector. We have different options here for things like dynamic content, design, etc. And in terms of the actual options, I've got different sections, like the background here. I can change the background of the entire page to gray or something dark or even black. And this makes editing different types of elements on the page nice and easy. If you were to browse around on the page and select different different elements such as text or logos, this right-hand inspector menu will change. So I've selected the logo up here, and you can see that we've got some design options. If I select the box here, I have some box design options, and so forth and so on with images and content. Now I'm going to create a new section to showcase how this works. Here I've got a blank section, and on the right side I have the size for this section. I can change the height to 200 pixels and it updates, or 400 pixels and it updates to that size. I can select the item and then I can change its background color. So here this section is changed to say dark gray or dark green. And on top of that, I can then do other changes too. I can change out the layout for this section. And this gives it a 2-grid layout with a left hand and a right hand column. And there's many more changes that you can perform. Let me show you. I'm going to create a new element. It'll be a text element and I'll drag it onto the page. Now for this text element, you'll see that the actual options on the right hand inspector have changed. I can change the theme for the text to go through some of our styling options. I can change the font as well. I can change how the text is scaled on the page when the page resizes, as well as things like the font and color and styling. Here, I'll change the color to be a dark green color, and I'll also select it to be bold and maybe italics and centered on the page. If you've used Figma before, you'll be right at home with this right-hand inspector. There's also other options like the position, and you get nice hover effects to understand exactly how each one of these will work. There's also details for this docking system, which is where the element on the page is positioned, and you can move this around. I'll get into that a little bit later. Let me showcase one more example of this time maybe something like an image on the page to showcase how the inspector updates different types of options. The inspector now gives me the option of changing the height and the width of this image, but it also has responsive behaviors, things like scale proportionally. This means that if I was to resize the page, the image stays more or less the same irrespective of the page width. There are other options too, such as relative width, which means that the height will stay the same for the image, but the width will change. There's items like fixed, which allows the image to always stay the same size even when you resize the page. There are options for changing the border radius, so you have this nice border around the image. And there's another option too, which is under interactions. This is another tab on the inspector. It allows you to do things like hover effects, which, for example, could expand out the image when you hover over it. So I'm going to select to preview this page, and you can see now when I hover the cursor over it, the image actually gets a little bit larger. And this inspector element is something that's always having more and more features added to it. Personally, I like the alignment options right now, which allows me to center or change the position of elements on a section by simply selecting these items here, allowing me to align it to the top or the bottom or the center of this grid item. This is just a quick overview of the inspector element, and I'll get into more of the customization on each element later in this video, but it should give you an idea of just how it all works. Now, I want to clear off this entire page by deleting all the items and have a look at a new system called docking. To get the system ready, I'm going to add a new element to the page. I'll add this picture in, and as you can see, I can move its position around. I can lock it in vertically, and I can also lock it into position horizontally, right here in the center of this section. This is the docking system. You can dock things at the top left of a section, and when you do, their position will stay in the same spot even when you resize the page or even when you go to different viewports on the device to make sure that it's always in that correct position. The docking system is actually quite advanced. You can dock things full screen, you can dock them and resize them, and you can always snap them into different positions. I'm going to resize this element and just move it here to the top left, and you can see that it's about 5% from the top and around 5% from the left, but sometimes you might not be able to get the exact measurements that you want. And this is where it's worthwhile opening up the inspector menu so you can specifically set how the docking happens. Here is the docking in the inspector. I'm going to change this 5.1% to 5% from the top and from the left. And this way, you can always make sure elements are placed the same. You can also change the docking measurements. You can dock in pixels. So for example, I could dock 64 pixels from the left and from the top, and now when I move things around, they are being docked in pixel amounts. If 64 pixels is too much, I can dock for 30 pixels, and I can even lock it so that it's 30 pixels on all sides. Additionally, with docking, you have different types of measurements. So here I've only used the percentage and the pixels, but there's also a view height, as well as there is a view width and scale as well. And it depends on how you want to design the page, but each one of these are useful for different approaches when you're resizing the page. Docking also changes depending on how many elements you have. If I was to add a text element in here, each one of these are being docked individually. And when you resize the page, sometimes they might not align perfectly. There is a few tricks around this. You can select both of them, and you can actually stack these in a container. You can stack them horizontally, which might not look very good, or if I select Ctrl-Z to undo and select both of them once more, I can stack them vertically. This means that they're now one kind of object, so if I was to select the actual container on the outside, I can move them together. And you can see the docking actually applies on the container and not on the individual elements anymore. If I'd like to remove the docking, I simply delete this container, and now they're back to two individual items. And if I just want to group them as is, I just select a right click and select to create container, and this container now exists as an element that I can even see in the nesting layers called box 10. And here I can select box 10 and I can move this around depending on how I need. And generally, docking works within the actual container you're working on, whether it's the section or whether it's a container inside of that section or even a grid element, and you can move these about, center them, and the snapping happens automatically. Now let me show you a little bit about responsive design in terms of Wix Studio. I'm going to take a look at the breakpoints for tablet and mobile phone and how they affect the overall design and elements on the page and editor. Here we're going to move this element here to the center and see how it's the same on both the tablet and the desktop. It's also the same on the mobile phone. This is because it's snapped into place due to the docking system. Updates only happen downstream, which means that the desktop will still have it centered, while on the tablet it will be on the left, and it will also be on the left hand side on the mobile viewport. Let me show you another example. I'll move everything back to the center, and then on the desktop I'll move it to the left hand side. It's going to be on the left on all the viewports, including the tablet and the mobile phone. Then I'll set it to be in the middle for the tablet and on the right hand side for the mobile phone, and you can see how all of these have applied depending on the viewport we're currently on. Alright, let me undo these changes and show you one more thing with responsive design, breakpoints, and how they work based on different viewports. It's interesting, so let's actually ungroup these two elements, this image and this text, and let's put them here on the left hand side. On the tablet view, I can actually even move their position or even resize the elements, and these sizings will update and stylings will apply depending on that specific breakpoint. So even here with the font, I could increase this to 48 pixels and expand it out so that it uses the left-hand side of the screen, and these only apply to the tablet view. They'll also apply to the mobile view, but not to the desktop. Furthermore, I can customize the breakpoint for the mobile version. I could expand out the image so that it's 100% width, and I could also do the same to the text, increasing its width to 100% and even centering it, so that way it looks a lot better. So this is breakpoints and how you can customize them. If you wanted to remove different breakpoints, you can right click on an element and review the overrides, and that resets them across all breakpoints, which is sometimes useful. Alternatively, you can do the opposite. You can right click and select to use on all breakpoints, and this updates that design for the width, height, and position to all the breakpoints. And breakpoints and their sizings always happen to work within the container you're in or the section you're in. So this means that if I was to create a 2-column design and I was to add an image across as well as maybe some text, then I could update the viewports only within that one section. If I wanted to move them across, I would not be able to do so. This is just so that the styling doesn't entirely break and it's always within the container that it's in. But if you need to change up a design, just remove the breakpoint changes or override them and then start moving the element across, or you can hold down Command and Option and then drag it across to override any changes. Now, I want to take a look at sections. Let me remove all this content right now. We start off with a basic site. This site here has this blank area, which is the section itself. A section can be added or removed by selecting this plus sign over here, and this has created another section for this site. Now, if I was to select a section and delete it, and we have no sections, you'll always have a plus option here to create a new one. Alternatively, you can head over to layers and you can right click and duplicate a section if that's what you want to do. or you can always add and go to sections and add a pre-made section. Another option you'll have is to select the layout tools under Quick Add and being able to select the section grids. They're very similar to what we saw before, but sometimes you'll have some additional options like this 3-layer design. Now, the reason we use sections is because when we add an element to the page, it mostly adheres to the section it's in, such as its, for example, docking area. Or if I was to change this into a to-type section, if I was to add an image, it would exist either on the right-hand side section or on the left-hand side section. And as soon as I move it below, it would exist on this bottom section. And all its responsive design adheres to that one section, so it wouldn't overlap unless you chose it to overlap. But it's overlapping in a negative way over here by maybe something like 20 pixels. Now let's take a look at some of the basic quick add elements. I've already shown you the simple ones like adding an image as well as adding a title. But there's a few other important ones. There's this one here, which is adding a paragraph, something you'd always do underneath a title or a heading. And it's quite simple. You can double click on it, you can modify it, you can even select it and have a look at the inspector here on the right hand side to customize things like its fonts, its styling, its positioning, and much more. And this is pretty stock standard and is what you would expect. The other item here is adding a button. So this would be like a call to action button. Wow, this red is much too dark for my liking. So this is where you could change, for example, its background color. And I think earlier I was showing you the code section and I went into CSS, and for the button here, I made the background color red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that. There we go. And having deleted that, the button is back to default. So here I could change it to be a blue color and all the colors update as you would expect. So with a button, if you want to change the text, you can select change text just over here. We can say click here to begin. You can also add a link. So you could link it to a page. I've got the About Us page, but you can also link it to other things like web addresses or for it to browse to a certain section of the page or even for it to go to an email link or a phone number. But for the time being, I'm just going to get it to go to the About Us page and select OK. In the inspector on the right hand side, there are additional options like scale proportionally. So this just means that if I resize the page, the button will get smaller proportional to the size of the window. Another element that you can add is a container. We kind of looked at this earlier where we created nesting when we grouped different elements together and we placed them into a container. This is one that has just been created here for docking. But you can create your own containers with their own colors. And here, for example, I could add this container on the right-hand side, which just has a title and a button. And then I could customize this container, giving it its own color, as well as maybe a border radius of 30 pixels or around. And really, this could be however you want. And now these elements are almost grouped. So if you select the container, they'll all move together. And if you want, you can essentially place this container anywhere you want in terms of the web design. Just makes the editing process much easier. And if you have a look under the layers, you'll see that each one of these are nested accordingly. Let me show you another element here, which is one of my favorites, video. So you can actually add in a video and you can select to change the video using some of the pre-made assets here, or you could upload your own. Heading back here, you can select the video and customize it, changing its settings, things like its description, or for example, you could change its focal point. So if, for example, you were to scale it out, the focal point itself is where the focus of the image is on. So here it's on the sky, here it's on the ground, and this is useful if you're doing things even like stretching it out to utilize the whole background, almost like a background video. There's also the option of the behavior. So does the video play automatically on click, on hover? Will it continue or will it pause when clicking? And does it loop or does it stop? You can even play it in slow motion or add in sound effects, which I don't recommend. There is also the option to mask. So this is where you can add a mask to it of different patterns, like this one over here. Or you could fade it out, for example, or maybe you might want to add your own pattern based on an SVG shape, like this triangle over here. For now, I'll place this video just here to the top left of this image and resize it a little bit so it's aligned. Let's take a look at another element here, and this time I'm going to pick this shape element. This is basically like a resizable shape that you can create bigger or smaller because it's essentially an SVG or a vector. So there's lots of predefined shapes that you can select, and you can always upload your own as well. And if you want, you can apply it, and then you should be able to change a number of things. So if we head over here to settings, you can add a link, a description, whether it's scales. If you head over here, you should be able to change its color too. Since it's an SVG, it'll apply to any color that you pick. This is useful for adding in things like social links or other SVGs, or even something like, for example, changing the vector art here at the very top of the logo to something different. Next, we have some basic lines. So a line is, well, a line, right? But you can use it to separate out different sections. So for example, I could have a line here between the text and this image to make it feel like it's separating out the two pieces of content. For the line, you could have it as 1 pixel, 2 pixels, 3 pixels. You could have it at dashed or dotted, and you could even change the color here to something a little bit more light. And this is just a useful way to have separation between elements. There's right now a horizontal and vertical line, so you can use them however you want. But for the time being, I don't really use lines that often because normally I feel like they separate out designs a little bit too much, but they can be useful depending on how you're building out your design content. So let me move on to the next element over here, and this is a gallery. Now, as you can imagine, a gallery is a group of images. I'm going to create a new section for it. And I'm going to have this gallery, well, I suppose exist in this section below. We're just running out of room here. It comes with a lot of pre-made images. Let's expand that out a little bit. And as you can see, these ones are something that you can manage and edit yourself, and you can have your own images. So right now, I believe there is just a mix of quite a few different ones. You can select which ones come first, second, or third. You can add your own images from images or videos or text, and then you've got them all represented here. You can also have the settings of this change depending on how you want it to display. So you could do a collage, or you could do thumbnails as a little bit of a slider, or even a slideshow that slowly plays in the background. This all has settings like can you download the images, share it, how does the design look if there's text and stuff like that. But it's just another way to create your website designs. The other item here that we have is the menu. Now you've already seen the menu earlier. There's one that exists here at the very top right. And you can also add one to the footer, which I usually like to do. So let me actually do that right now. I'll move it down here. And this just basically showcases what pages are currently on the site. So I'm just going to move this one up here. Let's give it a little bit more space in our footer, which I don't think is resizing properly. So there, I've got a little bit more space for my footer now. Let me move this element a little bit to the bottom and this element a little bit centered here in the middle. And that looks good. So now if I was to go to the About Us page, I should see, yep, there's the menu on the bottom and at the top. And then on the home page, there it is at the top and the bottom. You can customize the menu, adding in different elements or even different sites or external sites. And you can also customize its look too. So whether it scrolls, how much space between different elements, how much vertical space between elements, whether it's aligned to the left or the right or the center. Personally, I like from the center usually, and how much padding each item also has. So this is all useful stuff in terms of designing the look and feel of the page. The next element I want to showcase is one of my favorites. It's called the iFrame, but I like to call it the code block. And this is where you can write anything, really. Any type of code can be put in here, and you can start having it do any piece of code. So for example, I could add an image in here. So let me put in a source and a width of maybe say something like 100 pixels, and then go on Google and find this picture of Wix Studio, copy the address URL and paste it in here. This is an image URL, and you can see now it exists on this page. It's only 100 pixels. So if I wanted to make it larger, I could, I suppose, wow, that's a very long image. So it's a data image URL. So I'm going to actually try and see if I can find the original source image by going to the page, copying the source URL over here, and let's actually paste that in instead. So let me get rid of this, paste this in, go with maybe to 500 pixels this time, and it will be much larger. It is confined to the space you give it. So here you can see that it's overflowing, which is why there are scroll wheels, but you can expand it to use the entire page. And then now it's utilizing as much room as is available. So these are code blocks. Sometimes you might want to add all types of code in here, custom code, CSS, JavaScript. It's really up to you. All right, we've covered a lot of things, but now it's time to actually build a site. I'm going to get rid of all the blocks and we're going to start with an empty template. There are no sections or anything here. The very first thing I'm going to do is use Quick Add, and I'm going to start off with a menu. Now I'm going to do this by selecting the sections that are already made, and I'm going to head to headers, and I'm going to select this menu up over here. Then I'm going to select another section, and this time I'm going to go to the welcome, and I'm going to pass in this hello section. Instead of this, I'm going to pass in Wix Studio. This is too large, so I'm going to decrease this font to 38 pixels or maybe even 71 pixels. Neither of these seem like enough, so I might even do my own custom pixels amount. So here I might do something like 100 pixels by 300 pixels. And even with all of this, I can still move it up a little bit here at the top, and I might change its color to be white so it looks a little bit better. Here, I'm also going to zoom out of the page so I can see it even with my inspector open. And I've got two sections, this 2/3 section for this grid and this 1/3 section. I can customize it by maybe adding in one more button. So I'll go to Quick Add a button in here and click Start Now. But for this button, I'm going to select the background to be white. And by doing this, I'll also need to change the text over here to be the opposite color. So let me just select the text color from white to black. Could even do blue, which might stand out a little bit better. I could increase the font size, and when I do, I'd increase the button as well. This is a little bit too large, but something like this might work. So this is me customizing this page just over here. I might add in one more section, so I'll select Add, Sections. This time I'll go to maybe something like Products and select this one here, which fits in with the style of the page. This section has added above the section I had previously, so I'll go to Layers and I'll simply drag it below. So now we've got our header, we've got our section here in the middle, and we've got our Explore Our Latest Collection section. For this header here, I'm going to right click to select it, and I'm going to do something really cool, which is set as global, and I'm going to set it as the header, as a global section. I'll call this the new header, and here now that it's set, it will apply on all sections, and it'll only apply when going to a different page. So I could go to the About Us page, I could get rid of the old header that we had previously, and now I can go to add a new one. I'm going to go to the global sections and I'm going to add the new header in here. And here it is. So now it'll stay the same whether I'm on the home page or the About Us page. Now this is just how quickly and easily you can start building sites on Wix Studio, and a lot of these pre-made sections come with responsive design built in. I could go further into building websites on Wix Studio, but the best thing is to try yourself, to actually go to Wix Studio and to start playing around with it. This is the best way to learn, and I definitely recommend doing that, so I'll add a link in my description below where you guys can try that out yourselves. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to learn more about Wix Studio, or if you want to join my community, check out the links below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.